Hello and welcome to today's live session. I'm Leslie Gadet, self-care strategist for female entrepreneurs and their teams by empowering them with self-care strategies so they use their time more efficiently, stop the burnout cycle, and they enhance their quality of life in their business and beyond. And today I have a very special guest with me to help me dive into stress, how it affects us, and what has been effective in our own personal management of our stressors. So welcome, Ketsia. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into today's topic.
Hi, yeah, I'm happy to be here. My name is Ketsia, and I am a coach for women, and I help them to heal around money, to heal around their sexuality, and also to heal around their voice and visibility so they can bring their gifts into the world. And then I also have a community where I help people of all genders build a life and business that they're deeply in love with. So those are my passions. Super happy to be here.
Yeah. And I've loved watching your journey. We've known each other a little while now, and I've loved watching your journey. So this is great. And so thank you so much for carving out some time. I know it's early for you. You are on the West Coast, so thank you so much for taking time to spend with me your morning, my afternoon, so we can talk about how mastering our stress. And I really feel like we can become the master of our stressors if we just
Yeah.
understand specific things about us. So I'm going to get right into it.
Mhm.
So like I want to talk about first about understanding our own personal stressors because I think that's important to lead there to so people can see, where our perspective. So can you maybe share a time when stress in significantly impacted your decision making or your leadership, and how did you identify your stressors?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because there's a major way that my leadership and decision making used to get affected, and that was that I would overthink even the smallest decisions. And this is something that I had even as a teenager a long time ago, like what to get at a restaurant and like what flavor of ice cream to get. And I also have had anxiety since I was a teenager, and it wasn't until I went on my anxiety healing journey that I realized that lack of decision making ability was deeply tied to stress for me and anxiety, and deeply tied to a lack of trust in myself. So early on in my business, I looked externally for validation on everything. It's great to brainstorm with other people, but I kind of went overboard with the formatting and the pricing and everything, feeling like I needed to ask everyone else and I needed to hear lots of like, yes, that seems good to me. And it really held me back in my business. And when I started doing somatic work and healing my anxiety and dealing with the stress, it actually built a deeper connection to me and my intuition and a connection to my body. And I wasn't expecting it, but it allowed me from that place now to make decisions with clarity and with confidence. And so when I design my business now, I ask people's advice sometimes, but most of the time I don't have the need to, and it's really made my business excel. I put out programs with confidence, I price things with confidence, I show up with confidence because I'm coming from a calm, centered place. And yeah, for me, identifying those stressors, it was because anxiety became huge in my life. It just became something that was overwhelming. So I would get burnout and fatigue. So that's my first clue was those things, and that's what started the healing journey for me.
Yeah, no, I love what you shared too, especially the piece around looking for the external, saying like, okay, yes, this sounds good to me, but were they necessarily your ideal client, right? We really we lean on our peers, we lean on people that we know, like, and trust for that support. But sometimes we have to also be able to like think, okay, who am I targeting? What are they looking for? What are the outcomes they're looking for? Not necessarily what someone that I know that knows what I do can tell me sounds good to them, because they may not necessarily really fit into that model. They might, but not necessarily they will. But I loved how you shared that. For me too. So I not a lot of people know this about me, but I've struggled pretty much since I was a young girl with tendencies of obsessive compulsion disorder. Never really been, I would say, diagnosed with it, but I've just seen the signs of it throughout my lifetime, from the point of getting up in the middle of the night to go and check that all the doors, windows, everything's locked. Not trusting myself to lock a door, even if I saw myself do it and checked that it was locked, but going back to check again. And I notice that happens usually becomes more enhanced if I'm starting to feel tired, if I feel like I've got
True.
a lot on my plate. And and that's when the OCD, the tendencies of it start to pick up for me. And I've had to really be able to I shared that with my husband, because I often will, in our home, he knows generally to let me lock the door when we go anywhere because he knows I need to be secure knowing that it's locked. I don't know where this came from other than I know I've had childhood traumas that probably just came down to safety. So
Yeah.
I love that you shared that because it's so important to recognize that we have those stressful times in our lives that can really be exacerbated by other factors, like for me the OCD, for you the anxiety.
Yeah.
And for me, when the stress, I think really a recent time for stress I realized around stress was we were supposed to go live last week,
Mhm.
and my there were the hydro guys who were in the neighborhood. I didn't realize that I was going to be affected, and they were out there working on the lines. They were changing some things out, and all of a sudden my power went out, and I went outside to talk to them about it. And I was trying to be as polite as possible, but I was obviously peeved.
Yeah.
And they said that they were changing everything out because everything was old, and I was like, okay, I mean, it makes sense, but I didn't know anything about this, and I really felt like this, couldn't you have told me? Well, I came to your door 5 minutes before.
Mhm.
And he was like, well, that's not really notice now, is it? Right. But regardless of what happened from that moment was I recognized that it was a stop sign for me to take some time and actually dial it back because I had been going so fast for quite a few weeks now. And even though I'm a self care strategist and I'm a coach around this, I realized that, oh, sometimes I'm not listening to my own prompts. And
Mhm.
so I took that time and I started to read a little bit and I relaxed. And so for a couple hours, it was like a little over 2.5 hours, was when the power came back on, and you were so gracious in being able to reschedule for today. But what that did for me was it helped me to slow down because I needed that. It was okay, you're not listening, so I'm going to, I believe it was God saying, I'm going to actually make you stop by putting something in your way. So that
Mhm.
was one of my most recent, I would say, experiences around a personal stressor. But again, like how it identifying that too was realizing, okay, I understand, like it was because I had been going so fast.
Yeah.
And there's early warning signs of burnout, which I talked a lot about on this on when I go live. And it's just I was in one of those stages where I was in that beginning, like if I don't do something now, I could end up furthering the progress, my process into an actual burnout cycle, which
Mhm.
obviously I didn't want to get into. So yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up because I appreciate that.
Sure.
It's so important.
Yeah, definitely. And I was thinking safety before you even said safety. Like that is the key, is when we
Hmm.
don't feel safe, that's when those symptoms come up.
Yeah, and I think it's just all humans want to be safe,
Oh
but
yeah.
I think though for those of us who actually I don't know if I would say struggle, but we sometimes have to manage those extra things that we deal with, whether it's anxiety, whether it's OCD, whether it's any other kind of neurodivergent background, that we sometimes will find that those things will maybe affect us a little bit more. So yeah, it was just
Mhm.
really important, I think, for me to recognize there were signs there, but I was ignoring them, and that I was given that like that, you're stopping right now. I don't care what you think, you're
Yeah.
stopping. And so I allowed myself though to actually jump back and say, okay, this is it. I'm fine. I didn't let it take me and derail me. So
That's
let's
really
talk about techniques and tools. What are some of the most effective techniques or maybe tools you've used to manage your stress, and how do they fit into your daily routine?
Yeah, so I've learned a lot because of anxiety, and it's interesting because I know these things can be difficult to deal with, but it's been the biggest blessing in my life because it kind of forced me to learn all of these techniques to help me not go towards burnout. And so a lot of them are breathing exercises. I really love alternate nostril breathing. I do a lot of yoga. I've gotten into somatic body work. And all those things are really great, but I think the biggest tip is to put in pauses. Like how you were mentioning, you had just been going for so long, and it wasn't until like something out of your control made you pause. That's been the biggest thing for me, is whether that is, a meditation or just sitting in silence for a few minutes, doing even like a 5-minute pause between activities is really huge, because then you can tell you have that space to check in with how's your body doing, how are my emotions doing. Often for me, if I'm really, really busy, when I hit a pause period, I'll be uncomfortable. And I didn't even notice that I was like antsy, or I don't know what to do with this free time. If I have an hour before me and it feels like, oh, I should be doing something, like that's a big sign that I need to do some self-care. So making sure there's time to check in and to pause and to make sure that we're regulated, because our, especially being entrepreneurs, it can be very fast paced.
Yeah,
So that's
I
the
so
biggest thing that
agree.
I've made sure to add. Sometimes just as simple as making tea and sitting with your tea for a minute just to check in with yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that, I love breath work. I think it's probably one of my favorite things to do because it just kind of brings you back to that present moment. But bringing in those pauses, those pauses are important, and I think really even going that what I always try to, to express to anyone that I talk to about it, to or even work with, is like making sure that self-care is a priority first on your schedule. I do have my daily things that are on my schedule, but there have been moments just this week, and I've just noticed this week and last week, things have been a little bit much, a lot, I would say. So now that I've recognized that, I'm going to make changes moving forward because I understand that you can't really sustain doing the things. You can't sustain that. You just really can't. You can't sustain keep going and keep going and keep going without somehow that something pushes back. So I recognize for myself that my schedule has become a little bit, I wouldn't say erratic, but I think it's become a little bit overfilled with
Mhm.
certain things. And I'm not putting enough of those pauses in. And I think those pauses are so important. I agree with you. One of the things, also that I do with pausing is, so Shirzad Shamin, he has his PQ, his positive intelligence community, which I took part in, a 8-week coaching series with him. And it was, what I loved about it was learning to take those pauses. He inserted them into our day to help disrupt us throughout our day. And what I loved about that was it was just taking a moment to close your eyes, to breathe, whether it was to get really aware of touch, whether you're touching two fingertips together to feel the ridges, whether it was just you're listening to your breathing, feeling your stomach go,
Mm.
fill or to expel your air. Whether it was to pay attention to your hearing, the furthest sound, the closest sound. Those things for me really made a difference. And I've realized that those need to go back into my day to day because
Yeah.
they are meant to support me, not meant to disrupt me. And I've realized that now, just based on my own schedule. So I love that you brought that in about um, these effective technique for you is really like the breathing, the yoga, obviously, um, and also like as well, any other tools we can that we can use that will bring us back to, I think, like a calmer state of mind. I think it's really important. And I know we've talked about this, like how we both have so much, so many things happening in our lives, personally and professionally, that
Mhm.
sometimes it can impact us in ways that, well, of course, we know we don't have control over that. So
Mhm.
you're a businesswoman. You have, again, you support women around this. You support women in so many different ways. And when you are working with your clients, and when, as you work with them, um, and you look at how, how that interaction might affect you, how do you think maybe stress affects your role, maybe as the coach, um, and as the CEO, differently than any other positions, I would say, within an organization? Because I really feel, as a business, as a leader of a company, or as the leader of something, that it's just a little different. It doesn't mean it's better. It doesn't mean that you're better than or more than. It just means that your stressors are just going to be that much, a little bit different. So I wanted to talk about that from the client point of view when you're working with someone, and as well as you in your business. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. It is different being the person who is running a business because it all kind of rides on you, right? So like there's an amount of overwhelm that can sneak up really fast, at least for me. Because when I start feeling stressed and I start feeling overwhelmed, my clients are depending on me. My bigger vision is depending on me. Like all of it is connected to my health. And that's something I didn't understand
Mhm.
in the very beginning. And now it's something that makes me prioritize my health and my self care because I realize that the way that I show up for my clients, the way that I'm going to be able to create new programs, and the way that I'm going to be able to create, this grander vision for my business that I want, all depends on me being my best self and depends on me nourishing myself. And so I think in the beginning, I used to give a lot and I just always wanted to be there. And I thought that that was the best way to show up. And it felt almost selfish to do self care in some situations. And now I realize like the best thing I can do for my clients is take care of myself first and have strong boundaries and only take on, what is healthy for me that week. And so I think, yeah, I think that's what's different about being the person running everything. I think it amplifies it a little bit. Like just once things get out of whack, it can feel really overwhelming. But it's also a great opportunity to realize how important self-care is, and being coaches, right? Like it's part of what we do. It's part of who we are in the work that we do. So living by our own example is such a wonderful thing because I've built the business that I need. Like I coach women in the areas that I need to be coached. And so my self-care is to hold that mirror up of reflection and make sure, like, are you being a good coach for yourself too? Like, are you taking care of yourself too? And so that was quite a journey to get to as well.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because I struggled in the very beginning when I first became a coach to find out who I wanted to work with, because I was given this model of who is your avatar, where does she live,
Mm-hmm.
how much money does she make, does she have children, is she married, all of these things where didn't make sense to me because I couldn't connect to a fictitious character. But
Yeah.
when I started looking at my own life and realizing that
Mm-hmm.
person that I want to work with is a previous version of my life, of where I was before, and how I came through, that is so important. And like you said, which I loved that you brought this up, which was again a reminder for me last week, is to model the behaviors that you are teaching around. And I think, again, as a owner of a company, as a business owner, as the person who's leading the way, it has to start from that place. You have to be modeling that behavior so that other people understand that, and they feel that connection, they feel that they are, that they, oh, this is how things are, these are the things that are important to this, to the person that I work for, or work alongside, I should say. I like to say that instead of work for, but work alongside. And because they're modeling this and that this is important, then I know that I can make that important to me. And I love that, because that will then, I think, foster great businesses, when the leaders understand bringing that mindset into their own business is going to bring quality of life, not only for themselves, but for their team members, because they're going to be more engaged. They're going to feel more valued. So they're going to be more engaged. You're going to see more productivity. You're going to see better outcomes, team camaraderie, working together well. Even I would even go so far as to say it's going to affect your bottom line because things are going to get done more efficiently. Time is going to be used well. People are going to, be able to stop maybe going down burnout lane or burnout road because you have that mindset in place where you make sure that your team takes care of themselves because
Mm-hmm.
you are doing the same. So I really love that you brought that up. Again, it's a reminder to myself, even that I have to remind myself. I mean, as business owners, we have to remind ourselves that we have to be who we want to be able to support and be able to be that person to say, hey, if I'm asking you to do something, then I need to be doing it as well. And I think that's really, really important. So
Yeah.
yeah, so when we talk about that, so like a culture, right, of in a team, like work culture, I know a lot of people I've heard this term a few years ago, the culture ad, like how can you bring something different? But I wanted to look at like how as a culture, how can we foster a culture, because I want to talk about it in that instance, where stress management is a priority in your team, for your team or your organization. Like how do you foster that?
Yeah. So kind of like what we were already saying, but leading by example is the biggest way. And so I have people that I've worked with in my business, and I also have a corporate job, and I actually bring a lot of this with me to my corporate job. I'm a manager at a large global company, and I also run a couple of employee run groups that support minorities within the company. And so I get to network with a lot of people. And the way that I do it in my business and at work is I'm very vocal about my self care. I'm not shy to say that I had a therapy appointment. I'm not shy to say I'm taking Friday off as a mental health day. Like a lot of these things that kind of used to have stigmas in business as something that you wouldn't mention or talk about, I'm very vocal about. I take vacation. I take a lot of time off, even at my global company. Those that are in the European countries understand because they take months off every year, but in America we are very much taught like 2 weeks is the most that you should take off, and if you ask for more, then you're seen as being lazy or all sorts of other things. And that's part of the burnout culture that I'm really working to shift. And so I'm very vocal. I tell my US teammates at my corporate job, like, that's not normal. The rest of the world takes months off, and we really need time to decompress. And it makes you better at your job when you come back to work. And I say those things, and it has shifted the culture. I've had multiple people like stop and think and go, it would have been really nice to have a few days after my vacation to decompress. I just didn't think I was allowed to do that. And so vocalizing it and leading by example is really important. And I think being transparent on your own team and your business is really helpful. If I plan to do something with my team and I need to change things, I need to move an event because things got too overwhelming, I'm very transparent about the whole process. I let them know, I planned all these things and I ended up feeling really burnt out and overwhelmed. I'm deciding to move these things, and I tell them the why behind it. And I often tell them to make sure that they're prioritizing their self-care. And so the commitments that they've made to do for the community every week or every month, I check in with them regularly and say, like, does this still feel supportive for you? How are you doing? Are you excited about this work? Is any of it feeling overwhelming? That's a big part of my check-in with them, is making sure that their self-care is good and that they're still feeling excited. It's not just, hey, let's go over what are your duties this month. It's okay, and also how are you doing? Is this still a job that you're excited to have? Is this still a role that you're happy to fill? And how's your life going? Like, do you need support anywhere? And so yeah, I think just being very vocal, especially about mental health, with everyone on
Yeah.
your team, and being transparent when you are going through things, because sometimes as the CEO or boss or manager, we can feel like we're supposed to not show any of that because our culture teaches that as weakness. And I think it's so much more powerful to be human in front of your team and to show them all the things that you're going through. And even if you make a mistake, and how am I moving forward with that mistake with self-love for myself? You get to model what leadership can look like. And I think leadership can be really human and real, and very full of self-love and feminine energy. So yeah.
Yeah, I love your answers so many ways because I do love the fact that, first of all, you talked about it's really about giving yourself that permission piece. I think a lot of the time you were saying, like, people were asking, like, oh, I didn't realize if I could take extra time because I needed it because I was feeling maybe a little burnt out from a vacation. Let's face it, if you're out on a vacation and you're out there to have fun, sometimes you're flying to different location and you're jet lagged when you get back. This is real. And so maybe having that extra day to decompress from all of the excitement from the traveling is not such a bad thing to do, but it's giving
Yeah.
yourself that permission to say, listen, I'm going to be my best self if I take that extra day. So maybe factoring that in. I know unfortunately maybe corporate America isn't on board quite yet with that type of thinking, but maybe then you start saying, okay, well, I'm going to factor in an extra day. But maybe at some point, hopefully, my real goal is to have businesses, not just female led businesses, but all businesses really, to start looking at it this way, like, okay, let's have
Mhm.
that quality of life, because like you said, a lot of countries around the world, they really do, they encourage the time off because they know they have more, they have happier, more engaged workforce
Mhm.
when well-being is like promoted, is empowered. And then you talked about that communication piece, because I really think that's important too, is communicating how you feel. Like, people can't read your mind. So if you're feeling a certain way, especially as the owner, the leader, of whether you're working, like you were saying, in a corporate position where you are a leader, you still have a team that you run, or a couple of teams that you run. So being able to effectively communicate what's happening, schedule wise, that also shows them, again, that human side to you, but it
Mhm.
also shows them, oh, okay, that um, she's showing me what this can look like from a place of compassion for self, and then that shows me that I can do the same. I think that's
Mhm.
again a leadership trait. And then being transparent, because again, how are we going to learn from each other if we're not transparent enough to
Mhm.
share our life journey? I think we can learn from each other and grow with each other. So I truly love that. So
Mhm.
I want to ask you, let's talk about measuring success, because I know this is probably something that's on the mind, like, okay, well, how can I evaluate the effectiveness of maybe stress management strategies that I incorporate, or self-care strategies, or whatever those strategies are that I bring into my business? How can I like really measure that? How can I evaluate the effectiveness? And I think, like, for me, is the way I would evaluate the effectiveness is, first off, is looking at how your team is working together today. Like, have a
Mhm.
starting point and looking at, like, how well does everyone work together? Do you even know each other? Because even though people say, "Oh, I don't want to get to know my team on a personal level," the thing is, that human connection, still, you're spending so much time together, it's going to benefit you to know more about each other. So
Mhm.
looking at, like, okay, where are we starting at, what type of, what kind of people are we,
Mhm.
do we have families, what kind of lifestyle do we live? They don't have to share all of the details, but at least enough to get that idea of, like, who this person is that I'm working alongside, however many hours every day for Monday through Friday, if that's the workflow. So looking at that, and then from there is like really, when you bring in these tools, to help with, that stress management tools, to really start creating more self care strategies in place, like not looking uh, so much about quantity, but rather quality of output,
Mhm.
and making sure that they're taking those breaks. So to see, as an example, taking those breaks, and then at the end of, maybe say you give yourself 12 weeks. I like 12 weeks. I've been reading the book, The 12-Week Year. I love the principle behind it of having a goal very close to you, because it's not far out and it's still within sight. So maybe you have a 12 weeks sprint to see, like, what this looks like, and the whatever strategy you bring into place. And at the end of that, maybe having them, or maybe at the beginning, you have them take some kind of, like, questionnaire, answer a questionnaire, or do like the life wheel, the life
Mhm.
fulfillment or career fulfillment wheels. And at the end, have them redo it and revisit the whole process again to see how effectively everyone's, to see what changes have happened. And you're probably going to see changes happen when you start implementing things like that. So that would be one way I would do it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually really love everything that you shared because before this question, I hadn't thought too much about how to measure things. And so I'm going to use a lot of those ideas, especially on teams. Like, I think a survey, a check in that you can compare is really, really useful. I think the way that I do it right now, that's not as structured, is checking in with the motivation and the general feeling of, is everyone excited to be here? And you're not going to be motivated every single day. Like, that's just like unrealistic, but I can tell when there's a feeling of burnout because people are not as creative. They're not coming to meetings with the same kind of ideas. That, even if things are getting done, like, you can kind of feel, and maybe being empathetic, you can really feel the energy. So I think as a coach, like, even on my teams, I check in to see how the energy of everyone is feeling, right? Is there an energy of being stressed and being overwhelmed, or is there an energy of excitement? There's a very big difference. And you've probably
Mm-hmm.
been in meetings that have both of them, right? Where everyone's just like, oh my
Mm-hmm.
gosh, the work we're doing is so good. And then other times where everyone just feels really stressed. And so to me, that's the barometer of whether or not the stress help is working and whether or not there needs to be more support and more breaks. And the same with myself. Am I waking up excited to work on my business most days? Or am I waking up exhausted and feeling overwhelmed? Like, that's the really big tell for me. And just like we mentioned before, having those pauses and doing things like somatic work can really help too. If you schedule that in to like have a deep pause once a week where you're really checking in with everything and how does everything feel, then that can let you know too, like how all of it's going.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate your input today. It's really been great having you on today, Ketsia, and thank you so much for sharing your take on stress and what you would do. It's clear to me that understanding and managing stress is not just a personal priority, but very important for leaders. For our skills as leaders,
Yeah.
not even just in our professional life, but out there in the real world. Well, I wouldn't say the real world. I would say in your personal journey, to be able to be that leader. Because maybe you do other things outside of work that you need to maybe look at. How am I showing up? How am I influencing others to show up? So
Mhm.
I really love that. So I'd like to leave our viewers with a few reflection questions to consider. uh, Number one is, what are the primary sources of stress in your life, and how are they affecting you as a leader? How do they affect your day-to-day decisions? Because maybe that's something that you need to look at. Maybe there's things that are happening in your personal life that are coming and bleeding into your professional life, or maybe it's in your professional life that you're doing so much, that you're putting so much on your calendar, as I was saying I've been doing for the last couple of weeks, that
Mhm.
it's actually starting to affect you, and maybe it's affecting how you show up with your team. The second one is, maybe reflect on stress management tools and techniques that you're currently using, and are they effective? Maybe there's something new that you learned today that you'd like to implement. I have what I call the emotional triggers tracker, which I forgot to mention, but it is a tool that I use, that I've used with clients, where it helps them to take a look at what emotional stressors are having them emotionally responding, and how to become aware of that, to become aware of their habits and how they respond. So if you want access to that tool, just message me and I can send it to you. And finally, how does your approach to stress management influence your team's environment and productivity? Are there changes you could make to foster a more resilient organization? So I want you to take some time to reflect. And if you find yourself seeking deeper insights, maybe you need more personalized strategies, I encourage you to reach out to myself or to Ketsia. And remember, every step you take towards better stress management is a step towards a more effective and fulfilling leadership journey. So again, I look forward to supporting each of you as you transform your stress into catalysts for growth and leadership excellence. Ketsia, thank you again. It's been a pleasure having you on today, and thank you for all of you joining us. And keep an eye out for more sessions like this, where we're going to tackle the real challenges leaders face with practical, actionable solutions. Thanks again, Ketsia, and thanks
Thank
again,
you.
everyone.